I never thought a plastic container of homemade lasagna would change my life, but here we are. I'm sitting in my apartment right now, staring at that same Tupperware container washed and dried on my counter, and I can't stop thinking about Mason. Mason with his easy smile and the way he rolls up his sleeves before our shift starts. Mason who brought me dinner last Tuesday and said his mum made extra. I should back up. I work the evening shift at a manufacturing plant just outside the city. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills, and honestly I don't mind it. The work is steady, the guys are decent, and there's something satisfying about the routine of it all. I've been there about 8 months now, and for the last 4, I've been partnered with Mason on the assembly line. When he first started, I'll admit I noticed him right away. Not in any way I was ready to examine too closely, but I noticed. He's got this presence about him, you know. Tall, broad shoulders from playing college baseball before he dropped out, dark hair that is always slightly messy by the end of our shift. But it was his laugh that got me first. This genuine, unreserved laugh that made everyone around him smile too. We fell into an easy rhythm pretty quickly. The kind of work partnership where you don't need to talk much because you just know what the other person needs. Hand me that wrench. Hold this steady. Watch your fingers. That kind of thing. But we did talk. More than I usually do with people, actually. Mason had this way of asking questions that made you want to answer honestly. Not the usual, how's it going small talk, but real questions. What did you want to be when you were a kid? What's the best meal you've ever had? If you could live anywhere, where would it be? I found myself looking forward to our shifts together. Found myself staying a few extra minutes in the locker room if it meant walking out to the floor with him. Found myself laughing more, talking more, being more myself than I had been in a long time. Then last Tuesday happened. We were about halfway through our shift and Mason was quieter than usual. I asked if he was okay, and he just nodded, but I could tell something was on his mind. We finished up, clocked out, and I was heading to my car when I heard him call my name. He jogged over and he was holding this container, a big plastic Tupperware with a blue lid. He held it out to me kind of awkwardly, not quite meeting my eyes. His mum made extra lasagna, he said. He thought I might want some since I'd mentioned last week that I'd been eating a lot of takeout lately. I just stood there in the parking lot under the yellow lights, holding this container of lasagna, and something in my chest felt tight. It wasn't just the gesture, though. That was incredibly kind. It was the fact that he'd remembered, that he'd listened when I'd made some offhand comment about my eating habits, that he'd thought about me outside of work. I thanked him, probably too many times, and he just shrugged and smiled, said his mum always makes too much anyway. Then he got in his truck and drove off, and I stood there for another minute just holding this container like an idiot. When I got home, I didn't even bother with a plate. I sat on my couch and ate it straight from the container, and it was incredible. Rich and cheesy with this perfect meat sauce. But the whole time I was eating, I wasn't really thinking about the food. I was thinking about Mason, about the way his hands looked when he was working, strong and capable, about the way he'd bite his lip when he was concentrating, about how good he smelled, like soap and something else, something warm. And that's when it hit me. This feeling I'd been carefully not examining for months. I liked him, not just as a work partner or a friend. I liked him in a way that made my stomach flip, in a way that made me replay every conversation we'd ever had, in a way that scared the hell out of me. I've known I was attracted to men since I was a teenager, but I've never really done anything about it. Never dated, never told anyone, just kept it locked away in some corner of myself I didn't look at too closely. It was easier that way, safer. But sitting there with Mason's mum's lasagna and this realization blooming in my chest, I couldn't pretend anymore. The next shift was torture. I kept catching myself staring at him, at his profile when he was focused on his work, at his hands, at the way his t-shirt stretched across his shoulders, and the worst part was wondering if he could tell, if he noticed the way I'd fumble when he stood too close, the way I'd lose track of what I was saying mid-sentence. But Mason was just Mason. Same easy smile, same terrible jokes, same comfortable presence. We talked about a baseball game he'd watched over the weekend, about his little sister's upcoming graduation, normal stuff, friend stuff, except now everything felt different to me. When he laughed at something I said, I felt it in my whole body. When he brushed past me to reach for a tool, I was hyper-aware of every point of contact. It was like someone had turned up the volume on every interaction we had. Friday night, we were cleaning up our station at the end of the shift, when he asked if I wanted to grab a beer. Just casual, like it was no big deal. I almost said no. Almost made up some excuse because I didn't trust myself. But instead I heard myself saying, "Sure, that sounds good." We went to this dive bar a few blocks from the plant, the kind of place with peanut shells on the floor and a jukebox in the corner that only plays country and classic rock. We grabbed a booth in the back, ordered a couple of beers, and for a minute we just sat there in this comfortable silence. Then Mason said something that made my heart stop. He said, "I've been meaning to talk to you about something." I swear my blood went cold. This was it. He'd noticed me being weird. He was going to tell me he was uncomfortable, that he wanted to switch partners. I braced myself, tried to arrange my face into something neutral. But instead he said, "I really value our friendship. You're one of the easiest people I've ever worked with, and I just wanted to make sure I wasn't overstepping the other night. With the lasagna, I didn't want you to think I was like pitying you or something. I just genuinely thought you might enjoy a home-cooked meal." The relief was so intense I almost laughed. I told him he wasn't overstepping at all, that it was one of the kindest things anyone had done for me in a long time, that the lasagna was incredible. He smiled at that and something in his expression softened. He told me his mum had been asking about me. Apparently he'd mentioned his work partner who was new to the area and didn't have family nearby, and she'd immediately gone into mum mode. She wanted to know if I needed anything, if I was eating okay, if I was lonely. There was something about the way he said it, the way he was looking at me across the table, like he was trying to tell me something without actually saying it. Like maybe he'd been talking about me at home for reasons that had nothing to do with work. I asked him what he'd told her about me, trying to keep my voice casual. He took a sip of his beer, and I watched his throat work as he swallowed. He said he'd told her I was smart, funny, that I worked hard and didn't complain, that I was a good guy. The way he said good guy, there was something in his tone, something warm and almost tender. Our eyes met across the table, and for a second the whole bar seemed to fade away. Just him and me, and this moment stretching between us. Then someone dropped a glass at the bar and the spell broke. We both looked away, and Mason started talking about work stuff, something about the new equipment they were installing next month. But something had shifted. I could feel it humming in the air between us. We stayed at the bar for another hour talking about everything and nothing. He told me about growing up with 3 sisters, about how his dad taught him to fix cars, about the injury that ended his baseball career. I told him about moving here after college, about my family back east, about how I'd always felt like I was waiting for my real life to start. When we finally left, the parking lot was mostly empty. We walked to our cars, which were parked next to each other, and there was this awkward moment where neither of us seemed to want to leave. Mason had his keys in his hand, jingling them absently. I was trying to think of something to say, some reason to stay a little longer. Then he said, "Hey, if you're not doing anything tomorrow, I'm helping my mum with some stuff around her house. She's been after me to fix her deck railing. You're welcome to come by. She'd probably feed us lunch." I should have said no, should have kept that boundary in place, but I wanted to see him outside of work, wanted to be in his life in some way that wasn't just shift partners, so I said yes. That night I barely slept. I kept replaying the evening, analysing every word, every look, trying to figure out if I was imagining things or if maybe, possibly, he felt something too. And then feeling guilty for even hoping, because Mason had never given me any indication he was anything but straight. He'd never mentioned a girlfriend, but he'd never mentioned a boyfriend either. And the lasagna, the beer, the invitation to his mum's house, those were all things friends did. Normal, platonic friend things. Saturday afternoon I drove to the address Mason had texted me. It was a nice neighbourhood, tree-lined streets and well-kept houses. His mum's place was a blue ranch with flower boxes in the windows and a front porch that wrapped around the side. Mason answered the door in old jeans and a faded t-shirt, and my mouth went dry. There was something about seeing him in this context, relaxed and at home, that made him even more attractive. He smiled when he saw me, this genuine happy smile, and led me through to the kitchen where his mum was pulling cookies out of the oven. She was exactly what I'd imagined, warm and bustling and immediately insisting I sit down and have a cookie and some lemonade. She asked me questions about work, about where I was from, about my family, and she listened to my answers like they really mattered. I could see where Mason got his way of making people feel heard. After we'd satisfied her hospitality requirements, Mason and I headed out to the back deck. The railing really did need fixing, several of the posts were loose. We spent the next couple of hours working on it together, falling into that same easy rhythm we had at the plant. Hand me the drill, hold this level, watch that nail. But it felt different here, more intimate somehow. Maybe it was the domestic setting. Maybe it was the way his mum kept checking on us and smiling like she knew something we didn't. Maybe it was just being near him without the noise and distraction of the factory floor. At one point I was holding a post steady while Mason screwed it into place, and he was so close I could feel the heat coming off his body. Could smell his deodorant and sweat and that underlying scent that was just him. He was concentrating on getting the screw in straight, and I was concentrating on keeping my breathing steady and my hands from shaking. Then he looked up and our faces were maybe 6 inches apart. His eyes are brown. I'd noticed that before, but this close I could see they had these little gold flecks in them. We just looked at each other for a long moment, and I swear something passed between us. Something electric and terrifying and wonderful. He cleared his throat and looked back down at the screw. Said thanks for the help, voice a little rough. I just nodded, not trusting myself to speak. His mum fed us lunch like she was preparing for a famine. Sandwiches and pasta salad and those cookies, and about 3 other things I can't even remember, because I was so aware of Mason sitting next to me at the kitchen table. At one point his knee bumped mine under the table and he didn't move it away, just left it there, warm and solid against my leg. His mum told embarrassing stories about him as a kid. About the time he tried to dye his hair blonde and it turned orange. About how he used to make her play baseball in the backyard for hours. About what a sweet, sensitive boy he'd always been. Mason groaned and protested, but he was smiling, and I loved seeing this side of him, loved being included in this intimate family moment. As I was leaving, his mum hugged me. Actually hugged me, like I was someone important. She told me I was welcome any time, that any friend of Mason's was family, and the way she said friend, I don't know. It felt significant somehow, like maybe she suspected there was more to it than that. Mason walked me to my car. We stood there in the driveway, and I thanked him for inviting me, told him I'd had a really good time. He smiled and said me too, and then he did something that stopped my heart. He reached out and squeezed my shoulder, let his hand linger there for just a second longer than necessary, said I'm glad you came, in this soft voice that made my chest ache. I drove home in a daze. I couldn't stop thinking about his hand on my shoulder, about the way we'd looked at each other on the deck, about the fact that he'd wanted me there, in his mum's house, in this part of his life. That night he texted me, just a simple thanks again for the help today, followed by my mum really likes you. I stared at those words for way too long before responding. I wrote and deleted about 5 different messages before settling on, I really like her too. Had a great time. His response came almost immediately. We should hang out more outside of work if you want. If I want. Like there was any question. I told him I'd like that. He sent back a smiley face emoji, and I fell asleep holding my phone, feeling like a teenager with a crush. The next week at work was different. We were still professional, still got our work done, but there was this new undercurrent to everything. More touching, casual but deliberate. His hand on my back as he moved past me, our shoulders brushing as we worked side by side. More eye contact that lasted just a beat too long. And we started texting between shifts. Nothing deep, just random thoughts and funny observations and links to things we thought the other would like. But it felt significant. Like we were building something, creating these threads that connected us even when we weren't together. Thursday night I was lying in bed scrolling through our text conversation when he sent me a message that made my breath catch. It said I'd been thinking about something and I need to talk to you about it. Can I call? My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I typed yes, and my phone rang about 10 seconds later. Hey, he said, and his voice sounded nervous. I'm just going to say this because if I don't say it now I might lose my nerve. I waited. Couldn't have spoken if I'd tried. He took a breath, and then the words came out in a rush. I really like spending time with you, like more than I've liked spending time with anyone in a long time, and I keep trying to tell myself it's just because we're good friends. But I don't think about my friends the way I think about you. I don't look forward to seeing my friends the way I look forward to our shifts together. And I brought you that lasagna because I wanted to take care of you. Because I think about you when we're not together and I wanted you to know that. I was gripping my phone so hard my knuckles were white. I managed to say Mason. He kept going like he hadn't heard me. And maybe I'm completely reading this wrong. Maybe you don't feel the same way and this is going to make everything weird, and I'm sorry if that's the case. But I needed you to know. I needed to be honest because pretending I don't feel this way is driving me crazy." There was silence on the line. I could hear him breathing, waiting. I closed my eyes and took the leap. "I feel the same way," I said. "I've been trying not to feel the same way, but I do. I really do." Another silence, but this one felt different. Charged with possibility. "Yeah," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Yeah," I said, and I was smiling too, lying there in my dark bedroom grinning like an idiot. We talked for another 2 hours, about how long we'd both been feeling this way, about the fear and uncertainty, about what this meant and where we went from here. He told me he'd known he was bisexual since high school but had never really explored it. Had dated women mostly because it was easier, expected. But with me, he couldn't pretend anymore, didn't want to. I told him I'd never let myself really feel this way about anyone before, that I'd been so focused on keeping this part of myself hidden that I'd never given myself permission to want something real. But that he made me want to be brave. We made plans to meet for dinner the next night. A real date, he specified. Not just hanging out as friends. A date. I barely made it through my shift the next day. Mason wasn't working, and every minute dragged. I kept checking my phone, counting down the hours until I'd see him. I changed my shirt 3 times before leaving my apartment. Showed up at the restaurant 10 minutes early and had to sit in my car trying to calm my nerves. When I finally went inside, he was already there, sitting in a booth in the corner. He'd gotten a haircut. Was wearing a button-down shirt I'd never seen before. He looked incredible. He stood up when he saw me, and for a second we just looked at each other. Then he smiled, and all my nervousness melted away. This was Mason, my shift partner, my friend, the person who made me laugh and brought me lasagna and made me want to be brave. I slid into the booth across from him, and under the table his foot found mine. We ordered food we barely touched, too busy talking and laughing and letting ourselves be honest about everything we'd been feeling. At one point he reached across the table and took my hand, laced our fingers together. It was the first time we'd held hands, and it felt monumental. His hand was warm and calloused from work, and it fit perfectly with mine. After dinner we walked around downtown, still holding hands. It was dark and the streets weren't too crowded, and I felt brave enough to be visible like this. To be 2 men clearly on a date, clearly into each other. Every time I started to feel self-conscious, I'd look at Mason and see how happy he looked, and it made it okay. We ended up at the park by the river, sitting on a bench and watching the water. He had his arm around my shoulders, and I was leaned into his side, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. He said, "I'm really glad you came to work at the plant. I'm really glad I met you." I told him I was glad too, that these last few months had changed everything for me, that he'd changed everything. He turned to look at me, and his face was so close. I could see every detail in the dim light from the street lamps, the curve of his mouth, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners. He raised his hand and brushed his thumb across my cheek, so gentle it made my breath catch. "Can I kiss you?" he asked. I nodded, couldn't find words. He leaned in slowly, giving me every chance to change my mind. But I didn't want to change my mind. I wanted this more than I'd wanted anything in a long time. When his lips touched mine, soft and careful, something in my chest cracked open. This was what I'd been waiting for, this feeling of rightness, of coming home. The kiss was sweet and tender and perfect. When we pulled apart, we were both smiling. He rested his forehead against mine, and we just breathed together for a moment. That was my first kiss. At 26 years old, sitting on a park bench with a man who brought me lasagna and made me believe I deserved good things. I told him that, whispered it like a confession, and he pulled me closer and kissed me again. We're taking it slow, dating properly, getting to know each other in this new context. But it feels right in a way nothing else ever has. At work, we're still professional, still good partners, but now when our hands brush, it's intentional. When we catch each other's eye, we share a secret smile. His mum knows. He told her last weekend, and apparently she just laughed and said she knew from the moment she met me. Said she could tell by the way he talked about me, the way he looked at me. She's already planning to have us both over for Sunday dinner. I'm sitting here now, looking at that blue Tupperware container on my counter. It's just a plastic container, the kind you can buy at any store. But to me, it represents everything. The kindness that started this, The courage it took for both of us to be honest. The possibility of something real and good and worth fighting for. I never expected to find this. Never thought I'd be brave enough to reach for it. But Mason makes me want to be brave. Makes me want to build a life that's honest and full and mine. And it all started with a container of lasagna and the words his mum made extra. Sometimes the smallest gestures change everything. Sometimes love sneaks up on you in a factory parking lot under yellow lights. Sometimes all it takes is someone seeing you, really seeing you and deciding you're worth the extra portion. I'm scared sometimes. Scared of what this means, how it changes things, what people might think. But then I remember the way Mason looks at me, the way his hand feels in mine, the way he makes me laugh and feel safe and believe I deserve to be happy, and the fear gets smaller. We're building something real, taking it one day at a time, one shift at a time, one home-cooked meal at a time, and I can't wait to see where it goes.